Adam Pearce just detonated a bomb nobody in the wrestling world saw coming, and the fallout is already reshaping everything people thought they knew about WWE. In a move that has sent shockwaves through locker rooms, corporate suites, social feeds, and the wrestling press, the general manager didn't dole out a suspension or a fine. He pulled the rug out from under one of the company's biggest names and terminated Seth Rollins outright. The announcer, the former world heavyweight champion, the self-styled Monday Night Messiah, the man fans had been told steered Raw for months, gone. Not for a storyline misstep or a rating hiccup, but, Pearce declared, because of an act so violent, so deliberate, and so career-threatening that calling it a fight would be an insult to the reality of what happened to CM Punk. What started as a shocking disciplinary announcement quickly morphed into an exposé, because Pearce didn't stop at firing one man. He peeled back layers of secrecy to reveal what he described as a months-long plot of political maneuvering, cover-ups, and corporate self-preservation that implicated figures near the very top of WWE's management hierarchy. According to the summary Pearce laid out, this wasn't an isolated incident sparked by heat or ego. It was the culmination of a campaign to neutralize CM Punk from the day he returned to WWE, driven not by creative disagreements, but by greed, fear, and power consolidation that a handful of executives allegedly sought to protect at any cost. The attack itself, as depicted in the files and footage Pearce presented, was not a sanctioned in-ring spectacle, but a premeditated ambush. Medical reports he cited painted a grisly picture. Punk, discovered unconscious backstage with injuries consistent with a sustained, targeted assault, wounds that medical professionals said were calculated to destroy not only his immediate ability to perform but potentially the remainder of his career. Pearce and his team claim to have obtained unedited security recordings that show Rollins wielding chairs and other implements in a prolonged assault that WWE's broadcast editors had allegedly trimmed down to avoid a public relations catastrophe. Eyewitness testimony included in Pearce's dossier described bystanders frozen, colleagues too stunned to intervene as a trusted star unleashed an apparently deliberate, repeated attack on a defenseless opponent, targeting a previously repaired tricep and other vulnerable points with the apparent intent to inflict permanent damage, words rarely used in wrestling discourse but used repeatedly by Pearce and those he spoke to. The narrative he constructed went far beyond the physical violence. It wove together text messages, phone and hotel records, receipts, and off-the-record statements that, taken together, paint the picture of a conspiracy. Pearce alleged that weeks before the assault, Rollins met privately with members of upper management in hotel suites and restaurants to discuss the Punk problem, and that on at least one occasion, he met with a top executive whose position in the company would make them a major stakeholder in any decision to neutralize a perceived threat. More incendiary still were claims that Rollins had been promised extraordinary financial incentives, an extension worth tens of millions of dollars, guarantees of creative control, and a string of main event slots, in exchange for ensuring Punk's exit. Those promises, the documents purport to show, were contingent on extreme measures, and corroborating records allegedly include payments and a paper trail indicating remuneration schemed to compensate Rollins for carrying out the plan. The conspiracy, Pearce argues, began the moment Punk walked back through the company's doors. Executives, he said, had for months feared the disruption Punk's return would cause. Deals threatened, storylines upended, profit streams potentially diluted by a performer who had the cachet and the creative demands to negotiate for significant control and revenue share. Punk's return contract, Pearce claimed, included clauses for creative input and profit participation that powerful figures viewed as a direct threat to their positions and their long-established economic arrangements. Rather than negotiate, Pearce says some in the company elected to neutralize the problem by any means necessary. What followed, according to the files Pearce released, was harassment and intimidation designed to make Punk's working conditions unbearable. Anonymous threats slipped into his locker, menacing calls to his hotel room, and shadowing after shows. When those tactics failed to drive him away, they allegedly escalated to physical intimidation and, ultimately, to the violent act that landed him in the hospital and set off the investigation. Pearce's team insists the injuries were deliberate and targeted. Medical professionals quoted in the dossier described patterns of bruising and focal injuries consistent with a systematic beating rather than a spontaneous brawl. One medical expert singled out the pattern as similar to what might be seen in an assault where the attacker has specific parts of the body in mind. Witnesses said they heard Rollins taunt Punk while striking previously repaired areas and glowed about trying to make certain injuries permanent. But perhaps the most damning accusations Pearce revealed center on alleged attempts to cover up the severity of the incident. He claimed WWE's public relations apparatus rushed to present a sanitized account to the public, a narrative of mutual combat or a backstage scuffle that spiraled out of control, and that internal communications show deliberate edits and strategy sessions aimed at minimizing the perception of criminal conduct. Pearce alleges that security footage was selectively deleted or withheld, medical response was intentionally delayed, and employees were coached to stick to a script. Even higher, that some medical staff were directed to downplay the seriousness of Punk's injuries, a decision that could have risked permanent harm. Those allegations, if true, move the story from a matter of internal discipline into potential criminal liability and civil exposure, which is why Pearce said he felt compelled to act publicly and decisively. According to him, his investigation involved collecting a mountain of evidence: covert recordings, chain of custody documents, witness statements from more than a dozen employees who, until now, had been too frightened to speak, and security footage that allegedly shows Rollins meeting with two unidentified men in suits shortly before the attack. An encounter, Pearce said, in which a briefcase was exchanged containing floor plans, schedules, and an apparent hit list of injuries to inflict. When confronted with the accumulation of proof, Pearce asserts, Rollins broke down and confessed in a prolonged, closed-door interview, admitting not only to the assault but to a pattern of being used by management to solve problems, an admission that, if verified, suggests the incident was neither rogue nor an isolated lapse but part of a systemic and disturbing practice. The dominoes, as Pearce presented them, did not stop with Rollins. He informed the board of directors and the company in a dramatic effort to force the organization's hand. Either they take accountability internally or he would escalate the matter to law enforcement and the press. When the board finally acted, they sided with transparency, at least publicly. Rollins was terminated immediately, the head of talent relations, a long-tenured